I'm Donna. I am 68 years old and I was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2012. When I was first diagnosed with lung cancer, I was um, put on a regimen of carboplatin, Alimta, and Avastin drugs. I received that for 4 or 5 months, did not do particularly well on it. My body did not react well to those chemicals. Um, my tumors, however, did respond as long as I was getting the drug. After we discovered that my tumors were not going to respond to chemo unless I was getting it all the time. My doctor suggested that I either go on another drug, chemo drug that was even harsher than what I had been on and did not have as good a results, or suggested that I might do a clinical trial. I had been told that I probably only had about 4 months to live, and I decided that number one, I was in no hurry to be sicker than I already was. And number two, that if there was a way I could help future patients by participating in a trial, that the trial was the way I wanted to go. I never, ever assumed that I would benefit from being in a clinical trial. I was very uninformed about clinical trials. A clinical trial is a way that the pharmaceutical company or researchers test certain drugs. They will see if the drug works at all, if that it moves to humans and out of the laboratory, and everything doesn't necessarily work the same way for um, on humans as it did in the lab. So in the phase 3 trial, like I was in, by that point in time, they're learning how in the fairly general population how the drug is going to react, if it's actually gonna work, if it how much of a dose is the right dose, and how frequent it should be. The clinical trial is just to provide the information that's needed to determine whether a drug should go forward into general population or not. One tumor started growing again, and I chose to have radiation, which made me have to get out of the clinical trial. Um, but I after radiation, I went back onto the same drug that we had been testing through the clinical trial because I had responded so well to it. And I stayed on that drug until from 2013 until 2019. And at during in April of 2019, I quit having any kind of treatments, and so now I'm just monitored every 4 months to make sure that my tumors have remained stable, and so far so good. I would go into a clinical trial without hesitation. If my tumors begin to grow again, my first consideration will be to get into another clinical trial. You are getting the cutting edge drug. And not only that, while I was in the clinical trial, I had a researcher and I had my oncologist. I had a lot of people really following my health. I had multiple, far more scans done, which some people might look at as a negative, but they were really following me closely to make sure that my response was what it needed to be. You can get out of a clinical trial. You are not stuck in a clinical trial. Um, so if you get into it and you are either sick or if your tumors are not responding the way you hope they would, you're not stuck in a clinical trial. And that's an important thing to know. To me, there will never be another option that I will consider first. I will always consider the clinical trial first. And because I felt that the quality of care I got was higher. And it's also saves you a lot of money because at least the drug itself is gonna be provided at no cost. So um, that's a huge consideration too. I would not be afraid to look into clinical trials. I would never accept a doctor telling me that there were no options for me. I have friends who had doctors tell them that they just didn't think there was anything more that could be done. They needed to go into hospice. Um, my advice is to look for a different doctor because that's not always true. Clinical trials are not necessarily easy to find, but I would certainly do my due diligence and look into whether there is one that's good for you. And I would also strongly recommend that you immediately go through genetic testing so that you know what kind of mutations you might have, because that will drive the kind of clinical trial you might be wanting to get into, and also just the treatment in general.